You're listening to the official Reformed Stoic podcast, covering politics, philosophy, theology, conspiracy theories. I'm ready to get to the bottom of this life. Are you? Join Wolfgang, Sketty Squad, Purity Gang, as we strive to take dominion over this dying planet. I am Reformed Stoic, and this is my podcast. Alrighty, gang. Good to see everybody here this late afternoon, evening, whatever we got going. Mic check, mic check. Let's see how cold this fresh 0 calorie Rockstar is. What flavor is this? Pure Zero, Silver Ice. Ooh, grapefruit flavor. Uh-oh. Well, let's see what we got here, boyos. It was in the freezer for maybe like 20 minutes. Quake was a good game. Yeah, it's not bad. It's not bad. It sounds like, or it tastes like grapefruit. Some sort of like a grapefruit carbonated drink. It tastes like a grapefruit soda. Tastes like a grapefruit soda, baby. All right, guys, I'm doing all right. Bit of a dramatic stream last night. Just kind of the winds of change are blowing. I did end up texting back my deacon. He's being really cool about what's going on. I ended up just saying that I'm like taking a step back and taking this month to figure things out. I don't know, man. I'll probably like try a couple of other churches, just see what's going on. But ended up being kind of a hectic day today. Slept in, got some groceries. I did manage to throw together a show for you guys today. We got a couple of presentations to watch on Blackrock. Hopefully I don't get in trouble. Hopefully it's fair use and all that. As long as it's not owned by Disney, I think we should be good. Kind of random the other day. I had to utilize a clip removal feature to remove a segment that we watched on fentanyl because it was owned by Disney. Yeah, so we at least should be good for the podcast. If after the fact it turns out that things are copywritten, then I can just have it removed from the VOD. It is what it is. But, yeah, so we got a couple of segments to watch on Blackrock today, the infamous Blackrock. Yes, it was somebody from chat who recommended that topic. They're just kind of buying up the world right now, and it seems like these presentations we're going to watch say just as much. Then we're going to check in on inflation. Got a couple of things to watch there. Article on that. And then we're going to go ahead and watch a video on the second coming of Jesus Christ. So, not an especially large amount of thought put in today's show, but we're going to make it work, baby. We're going to make it work. So, let's hit it with the news segment. News segment. Let's try that again. News segment. Woo. You're listening to the Reformed Stoic News segment. Let's go. Nice sunny day over here. Beautiful day to wear a hat inside. Let's go. Alrighty then, let's go ahead and get started. We're kind of just going to be getting comfy here. We got a 17-minute presentation from Jake Tran. This has a lot of views. Hopefully this guy doesn't mind sharing the wealth a little bit. Should be all right here. Lots of views. And then CNBC, 14 minutes. Be nice to me, boys. We're just trying to educate the world. Let's go.
Major financial institutions have teetered on the edge of collapse, and some have failed. As uncertainty has grown, many banks have restricted lending. Credit markets have frozen, and families and businesses have found it harder to borrow money. We are in the midst of a serious financial crisis, and the federal government is responding with decisive action. So I propose that the federal government reduce the risk posed by these troubled assets and supply urgently needed money so banks and other financial institutions can avoid collapse and resume lending. This rescue effort is not aimed at preserving any individual company or industry. It is aimed at preserving America's overall economy.
In January issue, the bailout was far bigger than the Federal Reserve let the public or even members of Congress know at the time.
During the 2008 meltdown, when the government bailed out too big to fail giants like Bear Stearns, AIG, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, who did they hire to analyze and clean up the mess? Another giant financial firm by the name of Blackrock, led by a very well-connected billionaire by the name of Larry Fink. BlackRock was awarded these key government contracts to help with the meltdown with no competitive bidding while being enveloped in secrecy. Basically, Larry Fink was hired to be the manager of Washington's bailout of Wall Street, even though BlackRock is one of the biggest shareholders in the same banks they were helping to get bailed out, making Larry Fink the most powerful man in the post-bailout economy. Fast forward to the 2020 pandemic.
Rick, quick question for you, sir. We're just getting word from the Federal Reserve, and this might be boosting the markets even more this afternoon. They are talking about the details of their corporate bond purchases.
The Fed making history today, and for the first time ever, began buying corporate debt ETFs. The unprecedented move driving an explosion in the corporate debt market.
We are committed to using our full range of tools to support the economy and to help assure that the recovery from this difficult period will be as robust as possible.
But again, as I mentioned, the Fed 2 weeks ago began buying individual corporate bonds, and we just got granular detail about what types of purchases it made yesterday.
And who did the money printer of the US, the Federal Reserve, hire to manage their scheme to buy corporate bonds? Basically, they were bailing out corporations that had too much debt to withstand the pandemic. You guessed it, they went right back to BlackRock. Even though, again, the same corporations BlackRock was helping to bail out were the same corporations that they own some of the biggest stakes in.
Keep in mind, though, these are just the top 10 holdings. The whole list, which the Fed has published on the New York Fed website, includes 794 companies. So yes, these are just the top 10 by holdings, but there are hundreds of other companies that could be part of the Fed's portfolio as well.
Larry Fink was the most powerful man in the post-bailout economy, and now he's arguably one of the most powerful men in the post-pandemic economy as well. And yet, despite all his considerable power, the general public has practically never heard of Larry Fink, with BlackRock barely coming into the public eye during the recent claims that they were buying up single-family homes. That's because Larry is smart. He's intentionally kept it that way. He spent the last 33 years building BlackRock into the biggest asset manager in the world, with over $9 trillion under their management. Not billion, trillion with a T. Today, BlackRock's clients include the retirement accounts of average everyday people in the form of pension funds. They also have sovereign wealth funds as their clients, other central banks, college endowments, Fortune 500 companies, and millions of individual investors. They're one of the top shareholders of many of the biggest publicly traded companies like Apple, Microsoft, Facebook, and even other major banks like Wells Fargo and Chase. And to put their $9 trillion into perspective, the 300 largest pension funds in the world only hold a collective $6 trillion. Vanguard, the
Yeah, so basically my understanding of this company is they said they have trillions of dollars to their name and they just buy up everything in their path, and they're basically just buying the world. Some of the stats I came across while I was looking into them, they own like 15% of Vanguard, which is one of the biggest investment firms in the world. So yeah, there it is right there. Wow! Vanguard. That's so weird. I wasn't looking at the screen when I said that. I paused on a shot of Vanguard. Yeah, they own like 15% of Vanguard. These guys got big money. They're buying everything in their path, and there's all kinds of speculation as to exactly what they have their hands in.
behemoth behind mutual funds and ETFs trails behind BlackRock with only $7.1 trillion under management. And if you put the big three asset management firms together, BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street, they control a collective $15 trillion. Roughly equivalent to nearly 70% of the US's GDP. And Larry Fink has done all of this largely in the shadows, with just a few occasional interviews and appearances on CNBC. He's like the Wizard of Oz, the man behind the curtain, as William Cohen puts it, a former investment banker and author of House of Cards, an account of the Bear Stearns collapse. This is BlackRock, what some call the most influential financial institution in the world's largest shadow bank, and perhaps the company that owns the world. When Larry Fink was asked by Bloomberg if it's true that he's the most powerful man in finance, the man responsible for $9 trillion tried to convince you otherwise. That quote, "I don't think of myself as powerful," end quote. Is that true? Does BlackRock own the world? Well, it's a little bit complicated. Larry Fink is no doubt an accomplished man. That's pretty bold. Yes, even $1 billion can't reverse a head that's already gone bald, unless you take preventative measures before the balding starts happening. Did you know 2 out of every 3 guys who experience—
Oh, come on. You just get hair transplants, dude. You're gonna advertise bald shit?
That is where today's video sponsor comes in. Mail online, then you start using your treatment for months. So it's super important for you.
Wonderful.
BlackRock boasts some impressive stats. In 2010, they were called the most influential financial institution in the world. And in 2014, they had $4 trillion under management, making them the world's biggest asset manager.
Yeah, as far as forgiving student loans, you know, typically you hear Republican conservatives arguing against that. I, unfortunately, have personal experience with taking out student loans. You know, I was just young and dumb, and I didn't really know what I wanted out of life, and I just wanted to go to this expensive school. And I know that feel of just taking out a bunch of loans in your name when you're young and dumb and you don't know what you want out of life. And, yeah, I feel like they're leveraging the bad decisions of young Americans, and it certainly would be very nice if they forgive the student loans, because I think it's a manipulative, predatory practice.
For comparison, the Industrial and Commercial Bank of China only had $3 trillion at that time. And as I just mentioned, their assets have doubled to more than $9 trillion over the past 7 years. It seems BlackRock has a hand in nearly everything these days. They're a top shareholder in some of the world's biggest publicly traded companies, a top shareholder of banks like Deutsche Bank at 4.81%. In 2020, they were approved by the Chinese government to set up a mutual fund in China, making BlackRock the first foreign asset manager to be greenlighted for this. They also have shares in companies all over Europe, including industries like energy, oil and gas, transportation, food, and of course finance. And here's the kicker. BlackRock has what's called circular ownership, where they own shares in companies that own shares in BlackRock. Definitely not a conflict of interest. So they're literally everywhere. Because of their staggering size and power and the fact that they largely operate out of sight, BlackRock has been called the world's largest shadow bank. The question is, what makes someone build something this big? Larry Fink is known as the guy who always wanted more than he had. Friends have called him obsessive, paranoid about maintaining control. He's been regarded as someone who knows the markets inside and out and understands business backwards and forwards. But it took him a massive $100 million loss to get to this point. Larry majored in political science at UCLA and got his start on Wall Street.
See, a lot of people getting woke on the internet, they focus all of their hatred on communism, and you learn about, like, you know, why equality is evil and why socialists and leftist nutbags and borderline communists are so crazy, and you learn about how much death and destruction was caused by communism. Then there's the other side of the coin, where wonderful old capitalism, well, what does capitalism amount to? It amounts to companies like BlackRock being in control of $19 trillion. And when you start saying, because you're talking about like how taxpayers would have to do this or that, BlackRock could just snap their fingers and completely erase debt. You said, what, it's $300 billion? Well, they could basically like snap their fingers and they'd still control an overwhelming majority of the world's money, and it wouldn't even really affect them. It's like, oh, well, that's the beauty of capitalism, is that companies like BlackRock can control 70% of our country's GDP. And it's like, well, did they really work that hard? They just outcompeted everybody? And no, I think that kind of money, these kind of imperial money powers, this is like generations of wealth being held and kept. And when people start to sit on this kind of wealth, they don't let it go. And that's kind of where you start seeing some different perspectives on a more socialist way of thinking, where it's just like you focus on maybe some of these old money dynasties should be forced to like give up some of their money just because it's wrong for people to have this much money. And yeah, that's where you start to realize that the CIA's enemy always has been communism. You know, the CIA was formed under the guise of protecting our country from communism. And if you read books like David Wemhoff's Time Life on like Vatican II and the Jesuits, you'll understand that, you know, the CIA was making the rounds trying to weaponize everyone against communism. And it's not that communism is a good thing, but their interest in defeating communism is making sure that people who have all the money always have all the money. And we're living in a time where it's like, I, right out the gate, am $20,000 in student debt, and I have no resume to speak of, and I basically have a failed life at 31. And then there's people like this who control 70% of our country's GDP. So it is getting to a weird time. It's interesting when you talk about something like a great reset. It's like, well, sometimes I feel like we do need a great reset, but I think their great reset is the people with all the money and the power shove us through some sort of a hamster wheel test tube hamster experiment, and when all is said and done, they still have all the money. I kind of like the idea of a great reset, or maybe some of these people who have $9 trillion, like, only end up with $1 trillion. Like, is that enough? Do you really need $9 trillion? But anyway, that's just a little bit of my commentary on that.
At age 23. Having that edge in politics would later play a crucial role in him being the de facto middleman between Washington and Wall Street. He received offers from some of the top investment banks, but decided on First Boston, where he worked on structuring and trading bonds, which sounds incredibly interesting. He rose up the ranks quickly, and within a decade, he became somewhat of a legend on Wall Street by helping develop the debt securitization market, where loans like car loans, credit card loans, mortgages would be bundled together, sliced into pieces, and sold to other investors. If this sounds familiar, it's because these are the same mortgage-backed securities that led to the 2008 meltdown. But before that happened, this securitization of debt was considered really innovative, and it transformed the face of finance. All of a sudden, if you're a giant bank or pension fund or whatever that wants to invest in the housing market, you can now invest in a mortgage-backed security made up of thousands of hopefully safe loans. Larry Fink created one of the main tools that led to the meltdown, and he was also the one the US Treasury hired to clean it up. His interest in policy and strategic wizardry helped him gain a reputation as a true investment mastermind, and for that he was rewarded. Larry was making bank and received a ton of accolades. At just 31, he became First Boston's youngest managing director in history. Many even thought he would go to run the firm someday. In total, he helped add about $1 billion in assets to First Boston's bottom line. But then, the rising star came crashing down. Shortly after one of his biggest wins, Larry lost $100 million for his company. A missed call on his hand resulted in trades being wiped out, as well as the hedges designed to offset those losses being wiped out. And overnight, Larry went from a hero to a toxic asset that should be avoided at all times. He was ostracized, his reputation went up in flames, and his colleagues wanted nothing to do with him. He was forced out of the company he spent 12 years making around $1 billion for. While a catastrophe like this might mark the end for many people, that wasn't the case with Larry. Instead, he used it as ammunition, vowing to never find himself in a position where he didn't understand the risk he was taking again. And in 1988, he was 35 and hell-bent on rebooting his career. So Larry co-founded the Blackstone Group, along with now billionaire investor Steven Schwarzman. They started off with a $5 million line of credit. Fast forward to 1993, and they were crushing it with $20 billion under management. But in what some would call a power struggle between Fink and Schwarzman, where two super strong personalities collided, the two parted ways and Larry broke off to found Blackrock.
So I try to think like these people sometimes, because, I've given the broke college kid, these guys are billionaires, man, and I can't even I don't have any money, and then, people are just like, well, you don't fucking work. So I try to think, what would one of these guys say to me other than paying somebody to fucking kill me? It's hard to kind of imagine what role these people serve in society. They're moving billions and billions of dollars around, working all these great big investments. I mean, are they creating jobs somehow? Are they creating opportunities? Do these financial kings who just move so much money and manage so many assets and buy so much property, are they serving some sort of a vital purpose? If we just snapped our fingers and Blackrock was gone, would something bad come out of it? Would it result in people starving, or is there an important function that these people serve? And I don't really know. And I start to think about this a lot, the elites, the people who micromanage the world. Is there some sort of a necessity to their position? It's easy to say, snap, World Economic Forum's gone, snap, Rothschilds are gone, snap, Rockefeller's gone. Are these people serving some sort of a necessary function? Do we need people to micromanage this modern way of life? And it's at least something interesting to think about. I feel like the world would probably be a better place without them. But this does seem to be part of God's plan, and this is a big modern machine we live in, guys. I said something like this the other day, It seems like times are more safe. Typical American thinks about where they're going to buy a burger, how they're going to get laid, goes back to their home. It at least used to be, you work, you get a job, you live within your means. You can live a good life in the United States. But at what cost? What does it really take to create that way of life? And I almost wonder if it's necessary to have these big, this is the new Leviathan. The old Leviathan was the kings and the monarchs. I've coined this term before, the invisible Leviathan, because that's from the book Leviathan from Hobbes, early Enlightenment philosopher. He was speaking of monarchs like this necessary evil. Well, we got rid of that necessary evil, and maybe some people want to claim that nothing took its place, but I'd say these phantom Leviathans, these big money powers took their place. And all I'm trying to get at is, do they serve a purpose? Would we miss them if they were gone? Food for thought.
Channeling all his pain and trauma into growing the firm at a staggering rate. By 1999, it went public for $375 million. By 2004, it merged with Merrill Lynch, adding $500 billion to BlackRock's assets. And today, it's at $9 trillion. While the size of BlackRock is impressive, what really sets them apart is their software platform called Aladdin, basically a supercomputer they use for their clients. Aladdin is a network of 5,000 computers BlackRock uses to monitor millions of trades and analyze their clients' portfolios 24 hours a day to perform risk analysis. Aladdin is so widespread today that it's basically the central nervous system for many of the largest players in the investment management industry. And for them to be able to offer this service, they have to be granted access to sensitive data from banks, insurance companies, pension funds, and other important institutions all over the world. This high-end computer farm literally goes over every possible scenario and pinpoints anything that could possibly go wrong, allowing their clients to make the best investment decisions. And it's through Aladdin that BlackRock actually oversees more like $21 trillion worth of assets instead of just $9 trillion. And that's just from a third of Aladdin's 240 clients. Which means that one company, BlackRock, has an eye on the equivalent of at least 10% of all the stocks and bonds in the world. In 2008, the world enters a global financial crisis that hasn't been seen since the Great Depression, and Wall Street needs Washington to bail them out. Who do they call to manage the bailout? As you already know, BlackRock. The New York Fed personally went to Larry to help manage $30 billion in toxic assets from Bear Stearns. They brought BlackRock in to advise them on how to handle the $100 billion of toxic assets from AIG. They even contracted BlackRock to deal with the $301 billion of Citigroup's assets, all of which were done behind closed doors with no competitive bidding. And just like that, Larry was more powerful than ever. He went from being the laughingstock of finance to being the linchpin between Wall Street and Washington. As one bank executive said, Larry has always wanted to be important, and now he's more important than he ever dreamed of, and he's loving it. In the end, they made at least $200 million off of these contracts in total. The massive size of these contracts, the secrecy surrounding them, and BlackRock's enormous influence started getting people talking. Quote, it's like the Blackwater of finance, almost a shadow government. Blackwater as in the most infamous private military contractor during the War on Terror. Check out our mini documentary on them to learn more, link below. Now on the surface, this may sound bad, this may sound pretty shady and corrupt, but if you think about it, if the government is going to step in, which they are, even though I don't completely agree with that, what else are they going to do? They're at least partially responsible for this mess for setting such low interest rates, so they're obviously already incompetent. They're not experts in things like mortgage-backed securities, so why wouldn't they go to the man that is an expert that helped pioneer these things in the first place? I'm not saying it isn't shady and corrupt, I'm just saying that giving these million-dollar contracts to a man like Larry Fink is understandable. And it didn't stop there. When the you-know-what hit the fan in March 2020 with COVID, BlackRock came to the rescue for both Wall Street and the government again. The Federal Reserve hired them to help bail out corporations with too much debt or that needed to borrow money to stay afloat, which again included corporations they have huge stakes in, which is again definitely not a conflict of interest. They also helped the Fed purchase more mortgage-backed securities on top of that. So where does BlackRock go moving forward? What does a man do when he already has everything? In 2019, people were petitioning against BlackRock for being among the top shareholders for oil and coal production. In fact, investing in heavy pollution industries has basically been the backbone of BlackRock's portfolio over the years. So according to Larry, they're making a push towards environmental, social, and sustainable investing. Whether or not they actually believe in this stuff is yet to be known. Nevertheless, it does appear they—
You know, I was just thinking about that movie these last few days, The Big Short. I feel like I did watch it at one point, but I don't really remember it. I might have to check that out. I know it has something to do with business. And it's from like around 2014 or something like that, right? It's like a relatively not new movie, but newer, I guess.
They've made legit efforts to expand into this more eco-friendly market. With new environmentally focused products, they've partnered with activist investors, they backed a shareholder resolution basically forcing ExxonMobil to get serious about climate change. Larry even straight up wrote a letter telling companies that they need to, quote, contribute to society to receive his firm's support. This new push for sustainable investing, or ESG investing, is a big reason why you see so many corporations trying to appear woke these days.
If you want to invest in a company, they will, on their investor relations page, they'll show you their ESG score. ESG stands for environmental, social, corporate governance. And this is where the woke culture comes from. So they've created this kind of phony baloney rating system that says, well, if you, I'm exaggerating, but if you mention that you are, have a green agenda and you believe in carbon credits and you might trade some credits somewhere, then you get a higher score and therefore you're more investable. And it's very interesting to see how big investors like insurance company, institutional investors, they are steering away from anything that does not have the right ESG rating. And so in order to have investors continue to be interested in the stock, which is important for the company, for its perception, certainly for the officers of the company and the shareholders, you have to move this along continuously. And so it's very simple to see why doing a woke ad as Nike or as any other company, Pride Month is fantastic because Pride is easy. Throw up some flags, show the right people, trans, whatever, and you got a high ESG score.
The main catalyst for Larry's success is the soul-crushing humiliation he experienced after losing $100 million. That's what really catapulted Blackrock into what it is today. He put his entire being into the company, and most people agree that he's still as driven as ever today. When asked on a personal level what's important, this is what he had to say. This may sound trite, but it's really important for me to be perceived as a good human being, a caring individual that always comes across as real and unpretentious. And one thing I tell everybody, you may not be able to print this, is that I'm the same turd I was 30 years ago, and I'm really proud of that. If there is indeed an American oligarchy today, Larry Fink would definitely be one of them. But is he a good oligarch or a bad one? Are they just putting on a show to keep the public at bay? How influential is Blackrock really? How much control over the world do they really have? Let me know what you think in the comments below. So what is your verdict on Blackrock? Do they own the world? How much influence?
All right, let's take a look at some comments. It was nice knowing you, Jake. Yikes, we have the same first name. Like you're not supposed to be exposing these people. Haha, good one. Let's say hypothetically you have, like Blackrock, the most powerful supercomputer on the planet, which you use to predict events and manage your vast range of assets. At what point do you decide it's more profitable to engineer certain events rather than simply predict them? Purely hypothetically, of course. Should also mention that BlackRock owns 13% of Vanguard. There we go. That's where I read that. Which is the second largest financial institution in the world. When people like Jeff Bezos and Larry Fink are still bald, I have a hard time believing there is a cure for male pattern baldness. Some people just don't give a shit, dude. If you got that much money, it's like, listen, sweetie, I'll give you an extra $300. Like, treat me like I'm not bald. The less power a man publicly attributes to himself, the more he actually has. Really powerful people don't need to brag. They simply own. I really hope this gets recognition. BlackRock owns FPL, Florida Power and Light, and they have a monopoly on the energy market in Florida. They have hiked their rates by an unbearable amount. We shut our main breaker off at 10 p.m. every night until 8 a.m. We have not used a dishwasher, washer, dryer, coffee maker, toaster heaters, or AC since the rate hike, and swapped from Gulf Power to FPL. We used 550 kW last month total. All right, so this guy's trying to, like, save money on power, I guess. This isn't okay. Everyone's always worried about Amazon, but they never even look into companies like this. Well, I think a lot of people are looking into companies like this now. BlackRock, the firm nobody has ever heard of. Yeah, see, this video is from like a year ago. A lot of people are talking about BlackRock now. Except every kid studying investments that dreams about working there. Almost 90% of the time when I research a company, I'll see BlackRock as an investor. Always found it interesting that companies that make billions rely on the everyday working class citizen to keep the economy afloat. Meanwhile, they get bailouts and help from the government and other billion-dollar companies to keep their business going as strong as ever. Keep in mind, these are the things we know that they tell us. There's also a lot they don't tell us, and that's the most disturbing part. We never really know how bad or evil these corporations actually are and what they've done and continue to do. Yeah, there's something scary about a great big corporation with trillions of dollars to their name. I personally haven't put that much research into them. I'm looking forward to learning more about them. Let's do it. We got CNBC. Hopefully this isn't owned by Disney.
BlackRock is a financial giant. It's the largest investor on planet Earth with over $9 trillion in assets. That's a pile of cash equal to about 1/10 of a year's global economic activity. That means the money managers at BlackRock have a big say in how the world runs. Here's CEO Larry Fink talking to CNBC in 2021.
And I've been on your show now probably 4 times every year at the very least for 22 years as a public company, and even longer when we were private, talking about retirement.
BlackRock is indeed influential. In the US, it owns at least 5% of most major companies. That gives the firm lots of voting power to determine how public businesses operate. BlackRock rose to the top of the financial system in a short span of time. After its IPO in 1999, its stock has increased 7,539% through December 2020. Along the way, the company used technology to minimize the risks of investing.
BlackRock, as well as the other ETF providers, have done a great job in bringing a product to investors that provides diversification in investment portfolios at a relatively inexpensive price. And I think there's good reasons for them having grown to scale.
According to BlackRock, risk management today means adapting to the changing climate.
The largest oil and gas producers and the largest carbon emitters are state-controlled enterprises.
Their leadership has the sway to push global institutions into action.
BlackRock's relationship with the Fed is a really useful thing for the public to know about. The central bank can do things to make our lives better, and it can do stuff to make some people really rich.
Here's how BlackRock shot to the top of the financial industry. The company we know today as BlackRock was formed in the late 1980s. A young Larry Fink launched a firm under the Blackstone Investment Group with 7 co-founders. Fink's team came together under the management of Steve Schwarzman.
We started the business together in around 1988, 89, and they wanted to sell it 4 or 5 years later.
After the sale, BlackRock spent years developing a risk management software that they call Aladdin. Aladdin uses a Monte Carlo-styled algorithm to uncover scenarios in which an investment could fail.
Over the last really 20 years, financial markets have become much more complex. Volumes have increased exponentially. At the same time, we've had an explosion in computing power. Chips have become so much more powerful and expensive. The combination of financial markets needing increased technology and there being cheap, inexpensive ways to really scale up technological innovations has led to sort of the confluence of things like cryptocurrencies, robo-advisors, and even more basic things, simply like equity markets being almost completely electronic now.
BlackRock's tech-driven approach made it a major firm. Over time, their managed assets swelled, and the company started to buy out its competitors. In 2006, the firm acquired the distressed assets of Merrill Lynch, and in 2009, it took over Barclays Global Investors. At the time, BGI owned the intellectual property rights of iShares. Today, that brand is one of the most heavily traded names in the stock market. About 3 million shares of its fund tracking the S&P 500 are exchanged every day. ETFs, or exchange-traded funds, are at the heart of BlackRock's empire. These funds have taken over investing in the past decade.
I think we can attest that growth to the attraction of ETFs as pooled investment vehicles that allow investors to diversify their portfolio. And diversification has been shown to be one of the key factors for investors to have a successful investment program.
You can think of ETFs as baskets of stocks based on themes. For example, BlackRock offers funds tied to corporations and small towns. They also issue funds that track oil and gas exploration.
Yeah, it's getting to a point, I've heard a bunch of people make this argument. They spent the money to bail out the banks. It might be time to bail out the people. Instead of bailing out these big banks and institutions, corporations, maybe you should bail out the people, Maybe you should start thinking about forgiving that student loan debt. Like, who's to say that the banks deserve the money more than we do,
And the defense industry. ETFs give investors a wide range of holdings at a low cost.
And just to give a sense of how low those costs can go, let's take, for example, BlackRock's S&P 500 exchange-traded fund. BlackRock is charging investors 30 cents a year on every $1,000 invested. And there's great competition among fund providers for low fees, and that's been a great thing for investors.
Just 3 companies dominate the ETF market.
BlackRock is by far the largest, with roughly a 35% market share of domestic market. The next 2 are Vanguard and State Street, both somewhere in, say, the 15 to 20% market share range.
ETFs reshaped financial markets in a short amount of time. More than 80% of all assets invested over the past decade have gone to one of the big 3, according to legal scholars writing in the National Bureau of Economic Research. Experts say the financial and technology industries lend themselves to concentration.
Competing S&P 500 index funds, they're all holding essentially the same portfolio, and so they're all going to earn essentially the same return before costs. So from the investor's perspective, the best thing to do is to buy the one that passes through the least amount of expense to you. And because of economies of scale, that's generally going to be the largest fund.
BlackRock's popularity grew alongside the explosion of interest in passive investing. In addition to individual wealth, BlackRock manages sovereign wealth funds and has a burgeoning private equities division. The company is also a lender to emerging markets in Asia and elsewhere. 78% of the firm's revenue is derived from investment advisory fees collected from products like ETFs, which is why you might have read articles about BlackRock or seen their leadership on TV.
So this letter, you think, is the most important letter you've ever written?
More and more clients are looking for a more sustainable portfolio to be more prepared. Areas that are more impacted by climate change is going to have harder times to finance their debt if they don't focus on the impact of climate change in their district, in their region, in their cities.
BlackRock today is positioning itself as a socially conscious voice of the financial industry. You might hear their leadership talk about ESG.
So it stands for environmental, social, and governance. And the idea is that there are specific issues, whether it has to do with climate change or whether it has to do with boardroom diversity or whether it has to do with how your board of directors is constituted generally, that are important issues for investors.
One of the central components of BlackRock's plan is to issue funds with stricter ESG standards on business conduct.
That's a form of active management, and it has the same downside as any form of active management, which is it's not clear that it can outperform the performance of a broad market index. But of course, that's not really the sales pitch. The sales pitch to investors is these companies share your values.
BlackRock's leadership believes that these societal issues will impact the bottom line over the long term. Consider that BlackRock owns a 6.7% stake in the oil and gas company ExxonMobil. ExxonMobil alone is responsible for nearly 2% of global emissions, according to an open secrets analysis of climate data. BlackRock says it raised climate concerns with Exxon in 2020 over a series of shareholder meetings. It joined a group of activists and its peers to push 3 board members out in 2021.
But there's a look at the 3 new directors. So this really is reflective of just the changes in, frankly, capitalism in terms of the importance of ESG, even from a profitability standpoint or a standpoint of giving up some profitability to get your business in a different place with the prospect that you will ultimately benefit.
Exxon now says it will end routine flaring of natural gas by 2030 and disclose more climate-related risks. The tighter standards on public corporations may help, but they also could push polluting activity and risky assets into more loosely monitored private ownership.
Even a company like Blackrock that is investing in the entire S&P 500 is only investing in a very small part of, for example, fossil fuel production. The largest oil and gas producers and the largest carbon emitters are state-controlled enterprises that are really not amenable to any pressure from U.S. money managers.
BlackRock has acknowledged that there's a chance that the green transition will push up prices and political tensions worldwide.
Big public companies and banks are now being cast as a role of an emission police, having to cut off businesses or lending to companies, often smaller companies that have not yet reduced their own emissions. This will have the unintended consequences of fueling a backlash against our big companies, and it will promote a narrative big versus small, and will create greater and greater political polarization.
BlackRock's call for better stewardship of society was first heard in the European Union. The investment manager has a byline on the group's framework for sustainable investment. Regulators in the U.S. are focused on climate risk too.
So we view climate-related financial risk as a risk that falls under our existing mandates relating to bank supervision and financial stability. And what we're doing at a high level is we're undertaking a broad plan of careful analysis, significant public engagement, and great transparency regarding our role in addressing climate-related financial risks.
In past times of crisis, the Federal Reserve System has asked BlackRock for help managing funds.
The Federal Reserve has gone to BlackRock for particular services that BlackRock is good at. Now, those programs were unprecedented and unusual, but it's not abnormal for the Fed to be buying services from companies.
In 2008, New York Federal Reserve leader Timothy Geithner tapped BlackRock to manage the distressed assets of Bear Stearns and AIG. Geithner and Fink share a close personal relationship. The two sit on the board of the Council of Foreign Relations and were communicating frequently in the Great Recession. This pushed the money managers into the national spotlight. And in the early days of the coronavirus pandemic, the Fed system called on BlackRock again. In the following months, the central bank purchased trillions of dollars in various assets and debts, including corporate bonds. BlackRock was tapped to manage this portion of the purchases. Experts warn that BlackRock's work with the Fed could raise conflicts of interest.
What's unusual here is that the topmost people at the Federal Reserve are talking with the leader of the biggest asset management firm, and that in these moments of crisis, we're just going to this firm, not necessarily all other firms.
The company's 2020 annual report warns that their importance could lead to more oversight from the Fed. Meanwhile, the Federal Trade Commission is reviewing the standards on acquisitions and mergers, which could impact the bottom lines of mutual funds. And the Securities and Exchange Commission is reviewing derivatives markets, which could impact BlackRock too. The company is now searching for new sources of yield. For example, BlackRock is pursuing real estate investments like student housing, apartments, retail, and office buildings. The firm also opened a lab in Palo Alto to explore artificial intelligence. It's even dabbling in cryptocurrency, but leadership thinks that it's little more than a footnote.
The amount of conversations we're having on...
Yeah, I can see us revisiting all kinds of topics. You know, if I just briefly touch over every topic, I feel like eventually we'll run out of stuff to cover. So, yeah, we can come back to this at some point.
Climate risk and how they should navigate portfolios is a major component of the conversation. The conversations about our deficits and the conversations we're now having on inflation risk is far more dominant with our clients worldwide than the whole conversation about crypto.
BlackRock is focused on the long term. It oversees trillions of dollars in assets for a reason. Leaders and the public choose to trust them with their money.
One of the things about technology is if you get it right, you're really successful because technology helps you scale at low cost.
But there's no guarantee that their ESG plans will succeed.
The SEC's mission and the mission of anyone who manages money for investors is to protect those investors. The question is whether using ESG factors actually helps them to do that. Just saying ESG is good for our portfolio companies doesn't make it so.
Yeah, guys, it just seems like the way life is played out is that we have these money superpowers. And something that I've been thinking while watching this is that you either have monarchs or money rules. If there's not some sort of a power that more or less has, monarch or dictator level of power that exists outside of financial standing, money ends up ruling. Like in a libertarian free market world of free markets, what you get is money powers, money rules all, and money likes to make more money. And the easiest way to make more money is to have lots of money. So we're living in a very strange time where we have these money superpowers, and then we have lots of people who will just really never have a shot of getting anywhere in life. Blackrock is one of the top institutional stockholders of Comcast, which indirectly owns NBC, which owns CNBC. So BlackRock owns CNBC. That's pretty funny. This company is more powerful than the majority of countries, basically owns everything, controls all the money flows. Even though some of the comments may seem a little extreme, this is a very, very worrying company. Such wealth and power held by just one company is never going to be good. No, it's not. My biggest problem with BlackRock is its close ties to government, as illustrated by the fact that it keeps getting contracts from the Federal Reserve to manage different assets. Big power, guys. Big, big, big power. Difficult to comprehend. And I just start wondering about solutions. What can realistically be done? I mean, whatever solution we're going to get, it's going to be decided by companies like this and people who have the money. People who have the money have the control and have the power. An important thing to point out about democracy and systems of government, communism, the way it's played out in history is it benefits these kind of money powers. That's where Anthony C. Sutton comes in. You read about the Bolshevik Revolution. These communist societies relied on foreign export. So, these bigwig money powers, they just micromanage communist nations, and they're not the ones getting thrown in the gulags. That's never how it works out. In the fascist nations, they're not the ones getting put in the internment camps. They're not the ones getting put in the gulags. You vote Democrat, these tax increases for the rich, they're not going to apply to these people. They keep their money in offshore accounts. They got ways of stashing the money off the grid. Your vote does not matter. Like, there's going to need trying to separate these people from some of their masses and masses of money and influence. It's gonna take something beyond how you vote in a democratic election, for sure. So, stop panicking about inflation, BlackRock CEO tells investors. We're gonna get through this. BlackRock understands, guys. BlackRock, where were you the first time I got bullied? I need to be consoled by the CEO of BlackRock. Stop panicking about inflation, BlackRock CEO tells investors. We're going to get through this. Should we watch this right here? How long is this? A couple minutes?
All right, Larry, we've talked about the greatness of BlackRock, but now we're going to talk about the greatness of our country and whether it is threatened by inflation, whether it is threatened by global political tension, or whether this just happens to be in the long term business as usual for longer term investors.
It's definitely business as usual. I mean, when I started my career, when you started your career, we had much higher inflation, much more problems in our country than. We're going to get through this, and let's be clear. We do have really elevated inflation. A lot of it is policy generated. Our immigration policies. I could go on. A lot of things that we need to
that's
be
important. I like you go on because it could lead to a recession, and people need to know that.
And so much of the inflation is really related to supply, not demand. Demand is actually unchanged from 2019. Okay,
right.
So that's what people don't understand. Demand has not changed that much. But the reality is we have supply problems because of supply chains and all that. Obviously, we have the Russia-Ukraine war that aggravated this even more. But we've had, and then we had just a monstrous sum of monetary policy and fiscal stimulus over the last few years. It's all leading to this really elevated inflation.
Okay, so but
this is all fixable.
Right. Well, I totally agree with you. But let's say you're a person who's worried about retirement and say has 10 years where they want until they want to retire. Do you tell them, look, you can go buy a 3-year? What would be?
So I'm asked that all the question. I was asked by a really famous person, calls me up panicking. What should I do? I got to get out. I can't stand it. I can't stand it. I said, go on vacation. Okay. I just said, look, if you really can't stand it, then sell it. I mean, I'm not here to tell you if you can't sleep at night, sell. But the reality is we've seen this. The inflation is going to be fixed over time. We're already seeing commodity prices crashing from the high.
Right. No one talks about that. And supply chains gotten better.
Supply chains in a lot of the industry is getting better right now. And the Federal Reserve is tightening, and that is going to. The Federal Reserve's tool is to tighten, and through tightening, they limit demand. So, is there a risk of a recession? Sure.
But we're not in one yet.
No, but even if we're in one, it's going to be quite mild. The financial foundation of America is as strong today as ever.
Don't miss a second of Mad Money.
All righty. Thank you for that, Mr. CEO of Blackrock. The economic headwinds currently roiling the U.S. economy are flexible in the long run, meaning investors can afford to relax a bit, BlackRock CEO Larry Fink told CNBC's Jim Cramer on Wednesday. And remember, BlackRock owns CNBC, more or less. A really famous person called me up panicking. What should I do? I've got to get out. I can't stand it. I can't stand it. And I said, go on vacation. Okay, that's what he just said. All the major averages gained on Wednesday, buoyed by a rally in tech stocks. The market's gains follow its recovery on Tuesday when investors betting that the market is bottoming picked up riskier assets like tech stocks. These stocks have seen massive sell-offs this year after the Federal Reserve started raising interest rates to tamp down inflation. When Cramer asked whether persistent inflation, the Fed's rate increases, and the Russia-Ukraine war is a threat to the overall health of the U.S. economy, Fink said that the headwinds are business as usual for long-term investors. When I started my career, when you started your career, we had much higher inflation, much more problems in our country. We're going to get through this. Is there risk of a recession? Sure, but even if we're in one, it's going to be quite mild. The financial foundation of America is as strong today as ever. So that's the perspective of someone who has so much money that he could never possibly run out of money ever for 100,000 lifetimes. So he's all good. He thinks everything's good. Well, this is a pretty big topic, guys. I feel like we've only scratched the surface. When you're talking about like elites and who rules the world and where the most money is, BlackRock is definitely a name to have on the list. I feel like we're about to move on to our next topic here, how the U.S. made inflation worse. So that's from July 27th, pretty hot off the press there. Inflation Reduction Act, beware of this. Interesting. And then we got an article on that. Should be doing okay for time here. All right, let's check in on inflation.
Prices keep rising in America, and policymakers are asking how the central bank could let this happen.
Forward guidance, I think, overall slowed the response of the Fed to the inflation problem last year.
Investors think more price increases are coming. By the Fed's count of inflation expectations, prices will have risen an additional 6.8% by the summer of 2023. It turns out that the Federal Reserve might hold some of the blame.
It is going to be very challenging. It has been made significantly more challenging by the events of the last few months.
We need to make sure that the central bank is on the side of everybody in the country.
The big concern is that not only will we have these big increases in inflation this year, but that will lead people to expect higher increases in the future. Because if that's the case, it sort of compounds upon itself.
We could be headed to stagflation. It might get better, but it might get a whole lot worse. And if it gets a whole lot worse, brace yourself for uncertainty.
How did the US government misread inflation? And what does this mean for people in the United States? The Federal Reserve is America's central bank.
The job of the Federal Reserve is to safeguard the buying power of the dollar and to make interest rate policy in the public interest. They're supposed to minimize inflation, maximize employment.
It does this by working with retail banks that Americans use. Think Chase, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, etc.
Banks have an account at the Fed the way you have an account at a bank, and the Fed takes that money and invests it in treasury bills, mortgage-backed securities, and pays the bank a little bit of interest.
The Fed manages the US money supply. Their decisions can have a large economic impact, but some believe that Congress's actions within the economy are much more important.
The Federal Reserve needs to be reformed. The Federal Reserve needs individuals who are on the receiving end of monetary policy, not individuals who are only PhDs in economics who've never held a job in the real world and have a pension for life and are not affected by zero interest rate policy making life more difficult for savers who don't have a public pension for life.
The Fed's job is complicated. It involves making predictions about the future. Things like, how much will inflation be a year from today? And if it's up, what should we do about that? Experts believe the US Central Bank has made important decisions that drove better outcomes throughout history.
Just a little commentary on what Rick said here. I'll never have an adequate grasp of law, economics, or the philosophy of science. One thing I'm seeing about this modern world that we live in is you have to take it upon yourself to have an interest in these things, you know? I feel like people aren't telling you when you're a kid. It's like, hey, you know, if you study really hard in economics and finance, you can end up being some bigwig working for banks, you know, working for Goldman Sachs, working for Wall Street, working for Blackrock. It has to occur to you at some point, likely in your small town, in your public school, somehow the idea of, I want to be a Wall Street bigwig, it has to be incepted into your mind. Where was I at when I was looking at options after high school? Well, I went to parties. I really wanted to have sex with hot girls. I was experimenting with cocaine, allegedly. I was getting into death metal music. My goals were exclusively like trying to figure out how to get as good as I can at the drums. And it just never occurred to me to be like a philosopher or an intellectual. That's how I felt when I started meeting people on the East Coast who spoke highly of their intelligence, you know, people bragging about their IQ, people boasting their knowledge of philosophy. It's like, nobody really told me to study philosophy. Nobody really told me to like have an eclectic knowledge of history and philosophy. It has to like occur to you. Somebody has to like incept the idea into you to learn certain things, to be brushed up on certain things. And, you know, what are you fed? What are you fed in your natural habitat? You're fed TRL, MTV, music videos, Seth Rogen movies, public school. And what are the public schools focusing on? You know, like evil white businessman, the importance of diversity, the importance of feminism, to become one of these elite suit and tie. I have a wealth of knowledge on economics and finance. It's just not the path that most people are led towards. So a little bit more food for thought there.
Supporters point to the Fed's strong provisions of credit during the 2020 recession. This cash ultimately kept millions of people afloat as the world locked down. Also, the bank achieved a balance of low inflation, cheap lending rates, and low unemployment for the better part of 3 decades. This stability minimized price increases while supporting the creation of many jobs. But occasionally, mistakes are made.
The forward guidance, I think overall, on the margin, slowed the response of the Fed to the inflation problem last year to some extent.
So does that mean it was a mistake?
I think in retrospect, yes, it was a mistake, and I think they agree it was a mistake.
So here are the 3 big mistakes. The first was a sharp increase in the money supply. In recent years, the overall pot of cash in the Fed's control has grown sharply. Changes in the money supply can take months or even years to materialize within the economy.
If the same amount of goods existed in the economy, but there was twice as much money, then we would think that the price of everything would double.
This sharp increase initially showed up in the savings accounts of regular Americans, before they quickly vanished.
Well, from everything that we've seen, that money is concentrated in the hands of the oldest and the wealthiest Americans.
What has stuck around is a fierce upward spiral in prices for goods. As this dynamic took hold, the Fed kept adding dollars to the money supply, primarily by printing and issuing bonds that some say the market didn't need. The result was the sharpest bout of inflation observed in more than 4 decades in the States. Similar dynamics unfolded around the world, bringing forth a historic new inflationary era.
Very few households, if you will, ever got to enjoy the benefits of zero interest rate policy. Only your biggest borrowers.
Now on to mistake number 2. When it started to raise interest rates, the bank was doing so at way too slow of a pace. The central bank uses its federal funds interest rate to counteract this high level of inflation. Their models suggest that if this interest rate goes up, that'll make inflation go down. That's exactly what they're trying to do now. The central bank waited until March 2022 to flip the switch and make lending more expensive. They started with 0.25% rate hikes and have since made bigger hikes. This fast pace of liftoff is a start of a sharp reversal from the past 3 decades of policy.
So the Federal Reserve maintaining record low interest rates for a long period of time sort of led to some of the largest asset bubbles that we ever saw. And people who had money sort of going into the crisis and were able to deploy that capital into the stock market, into the housing market, have done extraordinarily well as a result of the Fed's policies.
The final mistake here was that the Fed waited too long to act at all. Early signs of inflation took hold for months before the Fed took action. For example, fuel was up more than 50% in November of 2021. Even prices for used cars were up over 30% year over year in the same time frame. This was happening as the Fed kept its interest rates near zero and kept buying massive amounts of bonds. At the time, the bank called inflation transitory, hoping it would pass. So far, it hasn't.
As Chair Powell indicated himself, both of us probably could have used a better term than transitory.
But the Federal Reserve wasn't the only group that made mistakes during this time. Economists believe that the federal government played a very large role in this inflationary spiral too.
Fiscal policy is made by the Congress and the president, and that involves taxation and spending. And that's different from monetary policy because it really affects the amount of money that is going to be in your pocket, whereas monetary policy works through the banking.
You know, guys, my stream's not really big enough to the point where I honestly need mods. I hate that it ends up being so dramatic when I unmod people. The reality is that I never necessarily needed to mod people. You know, there's quite a few people in my banned box who, in the times when all those people were getting banned, yeah, I kind of needed mods. But, you know, if this channel grows, which, you know, I kind of hope it does. I hope we keep getting a bigger audience here as the chat moves faster. First people on the list to get modded will be Rick Perry again. So it's not really a big deal, guys. It's not anything I want people to take personally. Look at right now. Is anybody getting banned right now? If one person showed up who needed to get banned, I could just ban them. It's not really a big deal.
System. So some of the record fiscal stimulus that we saw coming out of the COVID recession were expanded unemployment insurance checks, the general checks, the enhanced child tax credit. All of those were examples of fiscal policy to try to get the economy recovered as quickly as possible.
Economists like the famous Milton Friedman believe that inflation comes from changes in the money supply.
Most of the episodes Milton Friedman looked at were times when governments, who were in deep problems, printed money and handed it out. So if you remember nothing from this, remember one thing. If you print money and hand it out, drop it from helicopters, as Friedman said, you will get inflation.
The current Federal Reserve Board keeps track of this supply in a publicly available dataset. See the sharp uptick in 2020? This money went directly into the hands of actual people who spent it, saved it, or invested the funds. That creates a fierce rush of demand, and at the time, it was outpacing supply of the goods available, possibly creating inflation. A lot of that money went into emergency COVID bills like the American Rescue Plan. The government was able to spend cash it didn't have because it got huge loans from the Fed.
They're printing money to spend it, printing money to hand it out, printing money to make transfer payments. That's exactly what our government did in the last 2 years of pandemic. It's technically not printing money, but from an economic point of view, the same as printing it money and handing it out, and it causes inflation. So that is both monetary and fiscal policy.
The next time there's a handout, don't be so easy to take it. Just bear in mind what got us here, and that was overly intrusive and aggressive fiscal policy that was monetized by the Federal Reserve.
Outside of its own missteps, the government's fight with inflation was accelerated by various things outside of their control. Economists call these events black swans. In the 2020s, these so far have included
COVID, supply chain disruptions,
full-scale invasion by Russia into Ukraine.
But when the US government needs someone to respond to these events, they turn to their Federal Reserve. And whatever the Fed decides to do will then reverberate worldwide. That's because many businesses settle transactions with US dollars, which the Fed controls.
So there is a massive transmission mechanism that transmits U.S. monetary policy to the rest of the world. 80% of all transactions in the world are done using the U.S. dollar. And Fed policy influences and dictates where the U.S. dollar is. So whatever we do is not contained within the United States economy. It affects the global economy.
Dealing with these unexpected shocks is quite difficult, as the Fed wades through other unknowns. As inflation took hold, some voting seats at the Fed stayed open. And making matters worse, a key member was forced to resign in what some believe was an insider trading scandal. Other voting members like Michelle Bowman warned of the danger of excess inflation, but went unheard in the committee chambers.
The Federal Reserve Board is a massive organization full of staff who need to know who's my leader going to be. And Randy Quarles said publicly, had there not been that level of internal uncertainty and strife, that the Fed would have been raising rates last year when it knew policy had become problematic, especially as it pertains to the housing market, which is the only form of inflation right now that is in the Fed's control, and it looks like they're trying very hard to break.
Given that's the situation, it seems like the Fed's decision to continue to prop up the market was misguided, because that sort of added fuel to the inflationary fire that we're currently dealing with.
Economists believe that the Fed now has less ability to get things back on track without sparking a recession. It's still possible, though. To do that,
a lot of hard men in chat. I respect it. Let's go. Get hard.
They'll need to rapidly increase lending rates to what economists call a neutral interest rate. One where the economy is neither growing or shrinking too quickly.
The neutral rate is a real interest rate. It doesn't matter if the neutral rate is 3%. That means something very different if inflation is 8% versus if inflation is 2%. If inflation is going to be high and remain higher, that means that the neutral rate in the economy is also going to be higher. Because the price of goods are going up, we need a higher return to stabilize the economy. If we were actually measuring inflation in a consistent manner, the peaks in the 70s and 80s are actually much more similar to the peak today than we would have initially thought.
Still, the stories of the past could be relevant material for today's class of central bankers. While their mistakes are far and few between, they can have a profound impact. And for the record, their good calls can make a big impact too.
If they hold steady and are committed to breaking inflation, as was the case with Paul Volcker, then we'll get to the end of this situation of pain quicker than if they were to try and draw out, postpone, delay the inevitable. So I think at this point, the Fed has to stick to its guns, even if that means taking speculators down. And that really is what has scared the Fed in the past. The Federal Reserve is supposed to make monetary policy in the whole of the public's interest, not just that of investors. And this is going to be a test of which they have not really had to take since 1981.
Okay, guys. So yeah, inflation bad, recession bad. We're in this edge of our seats time where, you know, we've gotten through a pandemic. It seems like more or less it's over. No more mask requirements, no more isolation inside. But then there's monkeypox looming. I wouldn't be surprised if we saw some sort of a monkeypox lockdown in the next couple of months based off of the information we got from when we went over monkeypox a few days ago. Lot to chew on. I feel like the winds of change are blowing. A lot of people don't know what to expect. It is honestly getting out of hand, especially for us in smaller countries who rely on the US dollar. Worse is our government pretends like they don't see it. I for one, has been hit very hard at this point. I am more interested in a solution because I don't think an end is near. What is the way forward for the less fortunate ones like me? How do we survive this phase? I am slowly losing my mind. Losing his mind. Man, you know, I can relate to that, guys. By the way, maybe a good time for announcement. I spoke yesterday of considering rolling back to 3 podcasts a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. My friend Zeus, I can't remember his exact name, Zeus something, he talks to me in my DM sometimes. He was already under the impression that's what's happening. I might try that this week. We might go ahead and say Monday, Wednesday, Friday for podcasts. I don't know if that's going to be a permanent thing. There's advantages to doing it that way. There's advantages to doing it the other way. You know, podcast five days a week. It's a pretty tall order. It might free up some time for me this week to get some things sorted out. I think we are going to go ahead and try 3 podcasts this week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Now, I said on my stream last night, I had kind of a hard negative time last night. I was telling people I didn't want to do chill streams anymore. I'm still thinking about that. I'm just kind of thinking of ways to, like, make sure the streams kind of, like, don't drift off into staring at the abyss land and don't go for too many hours. Maybe I could consider filling up this time slot on Tuesdays and Thursdays with something else, more of like a formatted chill stream to where when it's time to go, I go, so I don't impulsively like stream for hours and hours and hours. Maybe we'll try some sort of a chill stream tomorrow that starts at 5:30 with a different kind of format. Still coming up with ideas, still kind of thinking about how we want to organize things around here. But I think I am going to go ahead and call it that we're doing Monday, Wednesday, Friday this week as far as podcasts. So let's read a couple more comments here. People will be kicking themselves in a few weeks if they miss the opportunity to buy and invest in crypto. One day ago, huh? People will be kicking themselves in a few weeks if they miss the opportunity to buy and invest in crypto. Man, maybe it's about time to think about buying in, guys. I don't know. What does the chat think about that? Is it time to buy, baby? Let's buy it. Okay, 4 minutes here. Then we got an article. I'm going to try to squeeze out at least an hour and a half today. 15 minutes from now. Maybe we can make it to 2 hours. We'll see what happens.
Senate Democrats striking a deal on a massive spending bill aimed at reducing inflation. What a dichotomy.
Yeah, I don't really think it is, but I'm going to read. You read that, we'll go with that. All right. Senator Joe Manchin touting the Inflation Reduction Act as a bill for America, claiming it will lower drug costs, increase energy security, and even reduce America's debt.
But what are the hidden costs? Here to break it down, Fox News contributor and former House Oversight Committee Chairman Jason Chaffetz. Jason, welcome. And first of all, how does Joe Manchin get on board with a bill that essentially attacks coal?
Look, what you got to understand about this bill is that it's not done yet. Kyrsten Sinema has not weighed in yet. They got Joe Manchin, and he went against his pledges. It raises taxes, which he said he shouldn't do. Even Barack Obama said we shouldn't raise taxes during a recession. The other thing is it's a massive spending bill. Remember, earlier in the week, they passed the CHIPS bill.
Yeah.
So if you add the CHIPS bill plus what they're trying to do in reconciliation, it's $7.
Okay, something random just to give you guys something to laugh at. I've been watching these clips. I don't know what game they're playing. It looks to me like it's multiplayer in Grand Theft Auto or something. Or maybe it's even some game in and of itself. If you look up Obunga, I don't know if you guys are familiar with the Obunga meme. It's like a goofy looking version of Barack Obama. Maybe I'll pull one of these up at the very end of the stream. There's some game where like you run away from the Obunga face, and I've just really been getting a kick out of that lately. I'll show you guys at the end of the stream. Moving on.
$100 billion in new spending. Don't tell me that it's going to reduce inflation. They're going to pour more money into the economy. What's that going to do? And the other thing is that's not going to reduce the deficit. They're counting on hundreds of billions of dollars in new revenue by IRS tax enforcement, which never comes to fruition. I don't care what you say, folks. It doesn't come to fruition. So beware of this bill. I don't know how Joe Manchin, when this bill raises taxes on coal production in West Virginia, good luck explaining that to the good people of West Virginia.
And meanwhile, in China, they're building coal plants. And by the way, the bill also is being touted by Al Gore because it has so much of the climate goodies that they want in it. Is this the trick that they take something called the Inflation Reduction Act, and they basically are tucking all the Green New Deal stuff into it because they know they can't pass it, but they just put it in behind these kinds of
There
needs.
is no justification by spending $700 billion with these two bills that you can say you are going to reduce inflation. I think it's going to have the exact opposite effect. We're spending more than $6 trillion in this country, 25% of our GDP, 1 out of every $4 in this country is being spent by the federal government. This is the problem, folks. The $1.9 trillion that you passed last year exacerbated the problem. Pouring another $700 billion is not going to solve it. And when you have people like John Kerry and Elizabeth Warren and those greenies out there saying, oh, this is the best green bill ever to pass, how does Joe Manchin get behind that? That's just unbelievable to me. Great editorial in the Wall Street Journal today for this. What was the deal that Manchin struck in order to do this? Nobody really knows.
Joe Manchin strikes again real quick. If y'all can put it up on the screen, I just want the audience to know 15% corporate tax minimum, prescription drug pricing reform. This is one of the goodies right there that they're using as a dead pill. The IRS tax enforcement as
that means they're hiring more IRS agents to get on us.
So again, they can name it whatever they want to name it. Increasing spending at the end of the day is going to only drive inflation.
And a few days before that, they passed the CHIPS bill. And shame on those senators who voted in favor of that bill. Because,
you mean the Republicans?
Yes, the Republicans who got behind that and made that happen because, again, the combination, maybe $700 billion.
You know, maybe it's just Manchin. He's taking all the arrows. Maybe he's telling Sinema it's your turn to take some arrows.
Yeah. Well, she hasn't said yet, so they don't have a deal yet.
All right.
That is the $1 million question there. We'll have to see.
Well, $700 billion question, yeah.
Good point.
Thank you, sir.
All right. Jason Chaffetz, thanks for joining us, brother.
Always good having Jason.
I'm Steve Ducey.
I'm Brian Kilman.
All right, couple of comments here. Spending billions of dollars of monopoly money to reduce inflation is like trying to put out a gasoline fire by dumping more gasoline on top of it. Oh, I wish I had the answers, boyos. I wish I had the answers. It just seems like capitalism overall is not a self-sustaining system. Eventually, the system heads in a direction where it's about to crash, and then bailouts happen, and then ultimately those bailouts only prolong the process. I don't want to predict doom and gloom, but a lot of people are just kind of blurting out like, yeah, this sucker's going to crash at some point, man. You know, I just want to be able to live my life. I think a lot of people just really wanted to focus on the day-to-day, man. You know, we're out here trying to find a good woman, out here trying to make enough money to stay alive and live comfortably. And now it kind of seems like these bigwig money finance people's problems are becoming our problems. And then, you know, we try to figure it out like, oh, how do we balance the GDP and how do we help stop inflation and how do we protect ourselves from a recession? I don't know, man. The more I know, the more I realize that I don't know. And I don't know. Always do your best and stand up straight, bucko. Integrate your shadow. Like I think a lot of people don't know what to say anymore. These are scary times. A lot fell on our plates. This should be the Create More Inflation bill. Al Gore is praising this bill. Tells a person all they need to know. When Joe Biden rolls his eyes, he's not being disrespectful. He's looking for a brain. Ha ha. If they pass both bills, Pelosi is going to be extremely rich. I was hearing some updates last night about Pelosi traveling to Taiwan and like we're on the absolute brink of a war with China. Like we're flying a bunch of military stuff over to Taiwan right now. So that might have been a good topic. That might have been some good breaking news for today. We'll see where we're at with that by Wednesday. Why is inflation so high? Do we got a date here? July 13th. All right. Couple weeks ago. Dashing hopes inflation was starting to level off. The Labor Department reported that the Consumer Price Index in June grew by its highest level since November 1981. CPI rose 9.1% in the month, up from 8.6 in May, exceeding 8.8 gain. I'm just going to kind of skim through this. CPI inflation highest since 1981. This morning's CPI number is staggering. The number is much higher than expected, and more importantly, it is showing that inflation hasn't peaked whatsoever. So the inflation hasn't peaked. We're really just going to skim over this, guys. I'm not going to milk this too much today. Inflation has been the Federal Reserve's enemy number one in 2022, and the Federal Open Market Committee has made aggressive changes to U.S. monetary policy to bring inflation down to its long-term target of around 2%. Could inflation help spark a recession? The Fed is facing a difficult balancing act, needing to raise interest rates aggressively to bring down inflation without triggering a U.S. recession. Rising interest rates increase borrowing costs for more companies and consumers, weighing on economic activity. Up to this point, the U.S. labor market has been solid, but the S&P 500's 20% year-to-date decline reflects concerns on Wall Street that the economy may not take spiking interest rates in stride. Zaccarelli says that he does not anticipate a U.S. recession in 2022, but he recommends investors position their portfolios defensively for the time being. What's next? Investors will be monitoring the Fed's commentary on the economy at its upcoming meeting. The U.S. Bureau of Economic Analysis will release the June PCE reading on July 29th. CPI and PCE measure inflation based on pricing a basket of goods. The two baskets are different, and the formulas used to calculate each measure are not the same. The CPI calculation is based on a survey of goods consumers buy, whereas the PCE is based on a survey of goods businesses sell. Jeffrey Roach, chief economist for LPL Financial, says the Fed doesn't focus on the CPI number, making the May PCE reading critical. The core PCE deflator, which accounts for substitution effects, is the important metric. However, the odds of a 75 basis point hike in July are looking more likely, Roach says. Signs that at least PCE inflation is moderating could be very bullish news for the economy and the stock market. I'm not going to act like I have like a really strong grasp on what exactly this is saying, but going back to what I was saying earlier, it's like I am starting to think like, is this the time to buy back into crypto? My view of the markets is, you know, there's ways to learn, there's ways to be knowledgeable, but at the end of the day, you get poor people with maybe like $1,000, $5,000 to their name, and they're like, oh, I think it's time to buy in, I think it's time to get on before the bull market starts, and, you know, there could be two people doing it. One guy's just crossing his fingers. One guy read a bunch of books. And what happens? You think it's about to be a bull market, and then it crashes down even further, and then you both lose all your money. And I feel like it just amounts to a lot of people just hoping to get on something big at the right time. It's sad, man. It's hard. It's hard to make a good, honest buck out here. And it's hard to make a good, non-honest investment buck out here as well. Buy real estate. A lot of people can't afford it, bro. Okay, guys. Well, we got 15 minutes on before the second coming of Christ. These 4 signs will take place. This is from about a year ago. Let's just go ahead and get this rolling. You know, honestly, when we do an hour and a half podcast, it could be worse. That's not bad. I think this is a good time for me to consider 3 podcasts a week, as it probably would bide well. Spend a little bit more time crafting the format. But you know what, guys? I am thinking I'm going to show up here tomorrow, same time, and we'll do a chill stream. And, you know, I'll just kind of make sure the chill stream ends around 7:30 or 8. Might not be a bad way to format the chilling fun. Try to keep things positive. I do appreciate being here with y'all. You guys have been very supportive lately. I got 3 patron supporters so far on my Patreon. Really appreciate it. Going to be putting some kind of behind the scenes, this and that videos there. I'll think more about the incentives as time goes on. We're kind of just building this as it goes, baby. Oh, yeah, and then we're going to check out Obunga. That'll be funny. All right, here we go, guys.
The Bible is a history book, but it is unlike any other history book available in any public library. The history of the Bible starts with the creation of the earth and ends with the end of the world. No other history book has ever been published that covers such a broad range of events on planet Earth, partially because no one was present at the start to witness and document it, and therefore, no one can write the beginning of our world authoritatively. We are the only folks in the world who know how it will all end. That is unique. The Lord did not reveal the future to his followers to satisfy their curiosity. It was to prepare them for the future so that they would not be surprised when it arrived, and that they would not misinterpret it. Be grateful that Jesus was so forthright in sharing what the future holds for us. People ask, are we in the end times? However, the Bible talks of the last days, and we have been in the last days for 2,000 years. The last days started at Pentecost, where the first prophecy of the last days was fulfilled. Every Christian generation should live to be ready for the Lord's return. The Bible is a book full of predictions. Its pages contain 735 predictions about the future. A prediction can be found in 1/4 of the Bible's chapters. From beginning to end, it is basically a prophetic text, though some books focus more on predictions than others. 596 of the 735 predictions have indeed occurred and have literally come true according to the scripture prediction. So, 81% of all Bible prophecies have already come true, and some of those prophecies were made centuries before the case. It doesn't take much confidence to believe that the remaining 19% will happen as well. That's a very high score. The Bible has proved 100% right for every prediction that could have been fulfilled by now. Of the rest, most of them are concerned with the actual return of Jesus and what follows after that. How many of these predictions remain to come true before Jesus returns? The answer is about 20, and we are watching to see those happen first before we look for the Lord's return. Jesus told us to watch and pray. What do we watch? We cannot stand still and watch the clouds to wait for him to appear. That is not what he meant. He meant, keep an eye on what's going on in the world and see what signs I gave you to help you prepare. Signals are the signs. So let's look at Matthew chapter 24, where the disciples asked him, what will be the signs or signals of your return? What would we do if we don't know when it's going to happen? To their inquiry, Jesus gave a direct and unambiguous answer. We can thank God that he responded in such a straightforward manner. In the book of Revelation, he gives a much more detailed and comprehensive response, but here, he gives a rundown of the signs that will precede his arrival. The disciples approached Jesus secretly as he was seated on the Mount of Olives. Matthew 24, 3-36. Later, Jesus sat on the Mount of Olives. His disciples came to him privately and said, "Tell us, when will this all happen? What sign will signal your return and the end of the world?" Jesus told them, "Don't let anyone mislead you, for many will come in my name, claiming I am the Messiah. They will deceive many, and you will hear of wars and threats of wars, but don't panic. Yes, these things must take place, but the end won't follow immediately. Nation will go to war against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There will be famines and earthquakes in many parts of the world. But all this is only the first of the birth pains, with more to come. Then you will be arrested, persecuted, and killed. You will be hated all over the world because you are my followers. And many will turn away from me and betray and hate each other. And many false prophets will appear and deceive many people. Sin will be rampant everywhere, and the love of many will grow cold. But the one who endures to the end will be saved. And the good news of the kingdom will be preached throughout the whole world, so that all nations will hear it, and then the end will come. The day is coming when you will see what Daniel the prophet spoke about, the sacrilegious object that causes desecration standing in the holy place. Reader, pay attention. Then those in Judea must flee to the hills. A person out on the deck of a roof must not go down into the house to pack. A person out in the field must not return even to get a coat. How terrible it will be for pregnant women and for nursing mothers in those days. And pray that your flight will not be in the winter or on the Sabbath. For there will be greater anguish than at any time since the world began, and it will never be so great again. In fact, unless that time of calamity is shortened, not a single person will survive. But it will be shortened for the sake of God's chosen ones. Then if anyone tells you, "Look, here is the Messiah," or "There he is," don't believe it. For false messiahs and false prophets will rise up and perform great signs and wonders, so as to deceive, if possible.
You know, I think Discord is really weird. I don't know why I have to update the link so often, but I guess, after this is over, I'll go ahead and update the Discord invite link, but just another non-user-friendly platform of our modern times.
Possible, even God's chosen ones. See, I have warned you about this ahead of time. So if someone tells you, "Look, the Messiah is out in the desert," don't bother to go and look. Or, "Look, he is hiding here," don't believe it. For as the lightning flashes in the east and shines to the west, so it will be when the Son of Man comes. Just as the gathering of vultures shows there is a carcass nearby, so these signs indicate that the end is near. Immediately after the anguish of those days, the sun will be darkened, the moon will give no light, the stars will fall from the sky, and the powers in the heavens will be shaken. And then at last, the sign that the Son of Man is coming will appear in the heavens, and there will be a deep mourning among all the peoples of the earth, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And he will send out his angels with the mighty blast of a trumpet, and they will gather his chosen ones from all over the world, from the farthest ends of the earth and heaven. Now learn a lesson from the fig tree. When its branches bud and its leaves begin to sprout, you know that summer is near. In the same way, when you see all these things, you can know his return is very near, right at the door. I tell you the truth, this generation will not pass from the scene until all these things take place. Heaven and earth will disappear, but my words will never disappear. However, no one knows the day or hour when these things will happen, not even the angels in heaven or the Son himself. Only the Father knows. Now, in that passage, he gave 4 distinct signs of his coming. So, what exactly are these 4 signs he gave us? The first is clearly disasters in the world, and he mentions, for example, wars, famines, and earthquakes. These are certainly happening, but they have been happening for over 2,000 years. They are getting more intense. So we certainly are in this first sign. There are already wars, rumors of wars, earthquakes, and famine. Jesus says, don't be deceived. He says that again and again, all the way through. As we get nearer to the end, the danger is deception. both inside and outside the church. In this case, he says, from false Christs, false messiahs, people who will take advantage of the turmoil of natural disasters to present themselves as saviors. There are well-known examples of people who pretend to be saviors and lead people into desert locations, only to end in tragedy. However, there are many false Christs, false saviors who claim to be the promised deliverer from all our troubles. The more problems there are, the more false deliverers there would be. But, as Jesus advises us, don't be alarmed. Don't be worried when you learn of a new war, a new tragedy, or a new famine breaking out. He said something astonishing. These are painful events, but they are not pangs of death. They are birth pains. So when you read of disasters in the media, these are the pains that mean something new is about to be born. This should completely change our attitude. We know what the world is coming to. We should not be alarmed or dismayed, not as worried as the world will be about these things. Disasters in the world are the pain of birth in a new world that is to be born. Therefore, we are very different. We have sympathy for those who are suffering disasters, and hopefully we express it in help. But in our hearts, we are not alarmed. We are hopeful. We are looking for a new birth of a new world, and therefore we are not dismayed or depressed by all the problems in the world. In short, Jesus' advice to us would be not to panic, not to be disturbed, but even to rejoice and say, these are all signs of something new happening. The second sign of his coming is not in the world but in the church. Disasters in the world are the first sign. The church, not the world, is the second sign of his coming. The first warning is disasters around the world. The second is changes in the church. Just as he divided the first sign into three parts, wars, earthquakes, and famines, he divides the second sign into three parts, all of which occur within the church. The first is persecution, that we will be hated in every nation. The second aspect of this sign would be a significant reduction in the church's size. Most people's love will grow cold. When the whole church is under strain, many nominal Christians, if not all true Christians, would leave. Under the burdens of universal persecution, their love would grow cold. That's a very depressing sign. The big surprise in the third part of the sign is that the gospel will be preached to every...
Christians being hated and love growing cold. It just seems like this is meant for us to be somewhat confused on whether these things are happening or not, but I definitely think you could make the argument that that's happening right now. Even true Christians leaving the church, love growing cold, Christians being persecuted, we're at least seeing the beginning of this now, I believe.
Every racial group. The third part of the sign is that the gospel will be proclaimed. A smaller, purified church would have a greater impact on the planet. That is exactly what Jesus is implying. False prophets can be a source of deceit in all of this. We are aware of the teachings of false prophets. When there is no peace, they teach peace. Rather than being a source of challenge, their message is one of comfort. It's all right, it won't happen, they'll say. Now, Jesus' advice is to keep going. Don't give in to these false prophets. Whoever perseveres to the end will be saved. When that sign occurs, when all aspects of the church are despised by the world, that is Jesus' advice to all Christians. Why should that be the case? The answer is that wheat and tares grow together, and the closer they get to full maturity, the more tension there will be between them. So it's only natural that Christians will be under a lot of pressure in the end. Christians are social misfits, so there would be hatred. The world does not belong to us. Our citizenship is in the heavenly realms. We are unique, and it is because of our uniqueness that hate can arise. Since Jesus was so different from everyone else, he drew hate against himself. John 15:19. If you were of the world, it would love you as its own. Instead, the world hates you because you are not of the world, but I have chosen you out of the world. It's not fun to be despised. That takes us to the third sign of the end times, which is Jerusalem's distress. Geographically, it will be very limited. In this passage, Jesus quotes Daniel's prophecies, and there is a character in Daniel's prophecies who is referred to as the abomination of desolation. Daniel mentions it 3 times. What does it all mean? What's the big deal? It's about a human being, a man who establishes himself in the very city of God, calls himself God, and refuses to accept anyone else's will above his own. A tyrant whose arrival will have global ramifications, but who will be centered in Jerusalem, the city of God, the holy place. Then Jesus says that the 4th sign of his coming will come immediately after that. So we shall know when he is coming. We shall be ready. When that sign comes, there will be no danger of false prophets or false messiahs. There will be no deception. It will be too quick. What will happen is that all natural light will be switched off. The sun will go dark. The stars will fall. There are many predictions of this all the way through the Bible. Isaiah says, "The heavens will be rolled up like a carpet. All the stars of heaven will be dissolved. The skies will be rolled up like a scroll, and all their stars will fall like withered leaves from the vine, like foliage from the fig tree." The natural light will be gone, leaving only artificial light to illuminate the earth. What is happening? What is going on? People may ask. This is it, Christians will exclaim. The sun, stars, and moon stop shining right before that happens. God turns off the lights of heaven to prepare for the blaze of light from the lightning that will mark his return. Then he comes on the clouds back to the planet Earth, and we meet him. We are not meeting in an earthly stadium, because there isn't one large enough to accommodate such a large crowd. We'll reach him in the air, and that'll suffice. Isn't that a fantastic prospect? When you see all these things, you know he is at the gates, just about to walk through, he says. Then Jesus gives a very simple statement about a fig tree, and this is where many Christians have gone astray. He says, "Now learn this lesson from the fig tree. As soon as its twigs get tender and its leaves come out, you know that summer is near." Jesus is telling us that when you notice all these events happen, you know that we are there. Now that analogy of the fig tree is not an allegory. It is a straightforward analogy from everyday experiences, such as Jesus often presented in his teaching. You see the fig tree doing this. You say the summer is coming, and it will come. In the same style, when you notice these 4 signs, you know that summer is coming. Sadly, people have read it as an allegory. In closing, our question for the day: what's a worship song that has helped you feel closer to God?
What's a worship song? Okay. This is powerful stuff, guys. And, I can just tell you that my experience, I went on what I consider a perennial quest. My understanding of what a perennial quest is where you basically seek truth. You seek the truth of the greater questions, which would more or less come in the form of some form of a religion or esoteric philosophy or something. And I landed in a lot of places before I landed on Christianity. And it seems like the beginning of my experience in Christianity started more or less from a Protestant perspective. And I feel like I have been heading to a landing point of more or less the mother church. And if I do decide, well, ultimately, I don't think I want to be a part of the Catholic Church, I at least realize that that was the unified point of Christian history. This idea that, the Catholic Church was evil and wicked and corrupt through the Middle Ages, I think that's a very sad belief to hold. I just see a time when Christians were united under the mother church before the schism and orthodoxy, before the Protestant Reformation. Maybe the church hierarchy wasn't perfect, but denominations aside, just landing in Christianity, this is the final truth for me. I'm never going to wake up someday and say, oh my gosh, I can't believe it. I'm realizing that Gnosticism is the truth. Or actually, I think I'm a Muslim. I would say people bring up Abrahamic religions. They just constantly drop it like it's some sort of a bomb of truth, like Judaism, Christianity, and Muslims, or Judaism, Islam, Christianity are all Abrahamic religions. Well, Jews have denied their own Messiah, and Muslims have been misled by a false prophet. That's just kind of my mic drop one-liner. The Word of God is exactly that, and you just look at this system that's laid out in the Bible and you try to comprehend it and think, is this the real deal? And there are some tough questions. You know, Jesus said things like, these events will all come to pass before your generation ends. Like, there's some strange things. There's some strange, like he said, these events would come to pass soon. Like people were waiting for the end times ever since Christ was here, and it's a lot to chew on. It's a lot to think of, but I can tell you, my friends, I see no truth that holds a candle to this one. There's just no sort of pagan truth that holds a candle. You know, nobody, like, you try to take the poetic Edda of the Odin religion and like, oh, you know, it said in the poetic Edda there's going to be this great prophecy and there's all these events that are going to unfold. There's this grand system of morals laid out for us. I just find that there is nothing that compares. I have seen that this is the truth, and I was raised somewhat loosely Catholic, and I fell into this system of programming. You know, it was the rhetoric of stand-up comedians and Comedy Central and the commentary of public school teachers that ultimately led me away. The culture of music, extreme metal music, and before that, you know, punk and MTV, Comedy Central, public school. It was these things that led me away from God, only for me to go in a circle and come back someday. And I came back bruised and beaten. And I do see, I've feared for my salvation and for my soul. I fear because of the way that I felt and the things that I've done. But it is a part of understanding the Word of God on some level. You need to understand that you are doomed to fail as a human. You will fail in the eyes of God. And that's precisely why the Son of God was offered up to us. It's okay to fail because you are guaranteed to fail. None of us are perfect in the eyes of God. None of us are anywhere close. And if you want to start doing right, you can start by accepting that Jesus Christ did in fact live. He did in fact perform all the miracles that are written about. The apostles lived, and the story of Christ is true. And when you see the failings of Christians, do not impose that on the perfect life of Jesus Christ. You need to read that story and think, this man was more than a man. This was the Son of God, completely selfless, lived a perfect life, and led masses of people and left an impact on the world that lasted all throughout history, through the crumbling of certain, we've seen the rise and fall of nations and ways of life, and this is it, people. This is the end all be all, the Alpha and Omega. Jesus Christ is the way, the truth, and the light. So before we head out, let's take a look at Obunga. Let's take a look at Obunga. Obunga is still terrifying. Yeah, these are pretty entertaining. I've been watching this without sound.
Oh my fucking Jesus Christ. Okay, this door's not open. It's a bathroom. There's a vent. Let me in the vent. Let me in the vent. Let me in the vent. I suck. Oh yeah, you can't get me now. Ah! No. Oh my God, it's actually kind of scary still. I kind of regret saying that it wasn't scary. Don't. No.
Dude, it's like funny and scary at the same time. It's funny and scary at the same time, dude. You see this face creeping up behind him, and it's legit like scary watching these people run away from this. I've been watching it on mute. This is the first time I've heard it with sound.
No! Let me in. Oh no, dude, that is actually terrifying. No, dude, no! What the hell is this, dude? Oh my god! No!
Alright, anyway, guys, that's pretty much it. We don't need to watch that for a long time, but I found it's been a guilty pleasure lately to check that out in between things going on, so that's pretty much it for today, guys. I feel just like I've had a lot on my mind lately. Last night I had kind of a rough stream. I do think I want to try, that might not be a bad format, you know, chill streams on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and just kind of keep it organized. You know, I find that when I do the streams late at night, that can kind of be a negative thing. I just got a lot on my mind lately, guys. I'm making some changes, believe it or not. I'm looking at some employment options moving into the future. I have made it public that I'm just kind of backing away from my church for the time being. I got a lot on my mind, guys, and I do think that the podcast has been a success overall so far. I appreciate you guys. You've been very supportive. And I'm just trying to create like a realistic future for this channel, man, because a lot of people have made it clear. I like the raw streams. I like you just going live, and whatever happens, happens. There's something special about that, but I've seen clearly that if it's just always unstructured chaos, it's pretty hard to turn that into something that stands the test of time. There's always going to be gems to be found in unstructured chaos, but there's just a lot to think about, guys, so I do want to turn this channel into something structured. That way it can last the test of time, and ultimately it can be something official. It can be more than just me being a deviant, and I don't even know what to say about it right now, guys, but we're going. Every day's flowing. It might be nice to have a little bit more breathing room this week to think more about the podcast. So I will see you guys tomorrow at 5:30 p.m., and we will try a chill stream. I might have a couple of videos ready for us to watch, just things to laugh at and hang out, and going to make an extra special point to create a positive environment here tomorrow, same time, and then we'll be back for the next podcast on Wednesday. So thank you guys. God bless you.